Alright, so what is memory? Memory is a storehouse of accumulated learning, basically anything that you can hold on to for a period of time. It is information that has been acquired and stored and then can be retrieved. And an interesting but kind of mind blowing thought is to think without your memory, would you be you? My argument would be no, but I'm curious to know what you would think. So, memory is something that we think of usually in terms of extremes. For example, extreme forgetting is called Alzheimer's disease, and Alzheimer's disease is characterized by the disintegration of the tau protein in the brain, which effectively creates all of these knots and spindles and leads to brain degeneration. You can see that the brain over here is much smaller than the healthy brain over here. Oh, and obviously Alzheimer's is the condition of forgetting most semantic knowledge, which is like facts and dates and names and stuff like that. So we measure memory on a couple of metrics. The first is recall, so receiving information that was learned at, or retrieving, information that was learned at an earlier time. One thing that forces you to recall is a fill-in-the-blank test question. The next one is recognition, identifying items previously learned, so that would be like a multiple choice. Relearning, which is the fact that you learn something more quickly the second time, which is why for final exams you just have to restudy. You don't have to go back and relearn everything. We're the best at recognizing because it's easier for our brains. We're not great at recall. So one of the first famous memory researchers is Hermann Ebbinghaus, and he decided that he was going to teach himself a series of non-words, so things like herb. I'm thinking ERB, but I guess that is a word. He would teach himself sounds that could be words that were not, like sog. And he demonstrated, so he memorized these 100 words, and then he would test his retention. So he demonstrated that memory strength correlates with response speed and recall, recognition, and relearning. But he showed here that this is the point at which he had immediate recall, and then after 19 minutes he was down to 60. After an hour he was below 50%, 1 day to 2 days, down to 30. But he showed that although we forget rather quickly, we retain information pretty well after that. So forgetting happens quickly at first and then more slowly. This is another way to show it. So this is his forgetting, right? This is the relearning. So the first time he relearns, it takes him, he has to relearn 60, then he has to relearn 35, then he has to relearn only 30. So each time he repeats, it is faster for him to relearn the data, or the non-words. So how are memories formed? There are a couple of different theories, obviously, because psychologists can never agree on anything. First is the information processing model. So the first step is encoding, which is the process of getting information into the memory system. Then you've got storage, the process of retaining the encoded information over time. And then retrieval, which is the process of getting the information out of memory storage. And this also kind of relies on the theory of parallel processing, which is that our brain naturally processes many things simultaneously. It's not like all of our energy goes into one thing and then we're useless otherwise. So this is the 3-stage information processing model. So it is built on this information processing model, but a little bit more detailed. So we have sensory input that goes into our sensory memory. We have a huge sensory memory, but most of it is lost because we don't pay attention. So whatever we do pay attention to goes into our short-term memory. We sometimes rehearse this, so imagine if you were given a phone number to memorize, you would say it over and over and over again. What you don't rehearse is lost, and then you encode it. This is where we get back here, right? You encode it to put it into long-term memory, and some information is stored there, some is lost over time, and you have to retrieve it to bring it back to your short-term memory to actually be able to use. And that was coined by Atkinson and Shiffrin. So sensory memory, like I said, is an immediate, very brief recording of sensory information. It is huge, but has very short duration, like on the order of milliseconds. So for like 10 milliseconds, you can remember absolutely everything around you, but then as soon as you go to access it, it disappears. So one example of that is spot the difference. Ready? What changed? I couldn't even tell you, but you could probably play around with it if you wanted. The way that they prove that sensory memory is so large but short is with this matrix. So essentially what they did was they flashed this full matrix, ignore the red boxes for now, to people. And then they asked for like less than a second. And then they asked them to recite which letters they saw. People usually got like 3 out of 12, which isn't great, but they were thinking, okay, maybe the time that it took even to recall those 3 led to them forgetting. So next, these are the 3, pretend. Next, they decided that they were going to show the full matrix, and then after they'd seen the matrix, they would ring a bell, and the bell was either a high tone, middle tone, or low tone. When they did the tone, the person would have to recall that row. Okay, and they got 4 out of 4 of that row, usually, which shows that they're able to recall all of it, but for a very short period of time. So the idea here is that you have 2 types of sensory memory, well, 2 main types. Iconic memory, which is fleeting sensory memory of visual stimuli that lasts for about 1/10 of a second, and you have echoic memory, which is fleeting memory for auditory stimuli, which is about 3 to 4 seconds. So if you ever notice when you're taking notes, you might be like repeating the words in your head. That's echoic memory. Then you've got short-term memory. Short-term memory is activated memory that holds a few items briefly. It has a capacity of 7 plus or minus 2. It's called the magic number, so 5 to 9 items, 12 to 20 seconds in duration. So that's about how long you can like hold something in your consciousness in terms of memory. So obviously we need Dory to help us with that, right? Not only is my short-term memory bad, but so is my short-term memory. George Miller actually was the guy who coined this magic number. He said that we can store 7 plus or minus 2 pieces of information in our short-term memory, and the more focused we are, the better we do. Multitasking, however, is the enemy. Never works. And then you've got long-term memory. Long-term memory is relatively permanent and limitless. Really, we probably have stored more memories than we have access to because we don't have the right retrieval cues. So hypothetically, the capacity is infinite. We just need to be able to get back to it. Okay, then they decided to make things a little bit more complicated by kind of redefining the understanding of short-term memory to this working memory. So that adds consciousness, active processing, and retrieval. So the idea here is that you have to integrate everything, right, in order for something to be used. Without focused attention, there's less chance of remembering. So working memory is like when you have to remember PEMDAS in your head in order to complete a math problem. Now we have 2 different kinds of processing. Automatic processing happens without our awareness, and that's going to produce implicit memories, things that we're not trying to encode. So automatic processing would be like reading or driving or walking forward, right? You don't have to think about those things, it's more unconscious. Effortful processing is encoding that requires attention and conscious effort. So that's going to produce explicit memories. So effortful processing is like when you're studying psychology and trying to learn it. Automatic processing holds implicit memories, which include procedural memory for automatic skills like riding a bike. They say you can't forget how to ride a bike because it's implicit. And also classically conditioned associations. So we tend to encode locations effortlessly, we sequence events effortlessly, and we keep track of frequency effortlessly. Like you can usually remember where you were when you learned something. Effortful processing is characterized by explicit memory. So that's how we learn things that will eventually become effortless. Driving, texting, new languages. This is a picture of my cell phone in high school, the chocolate. I know you're all jealous. Texting on this thing used to be effortless, but you would have to use this keyboard. And I don't know how I ever learned that because now I've unlearned it. So some effortful processing strategies to kind of cement things in your brain. Chunking is organizing information into meaningful units, letters, words, phrases, to recall it more easily. Mnemonics are memory aids that use vivid imagery and organizational devices like Regibiv. So you remember Regibiv and then you can access all the different colors. Or also hierarchies, which allow for efficient retrieval of information. Some other effortful processing strategies include distributed practice. We retain information better when encoding is distributed over time. The spacing effect, which yields better long-term retention rather than cramming or mass study. And the testing effect. So you actually recall better when you're forced to recall something more often. This is why I give you small quizzes every week. That's called desirable difficulty. If something is difficult enough, your brain will say, oh, I should remember this, and they'll remember it better. So this kind of demonstrates this. The yellow group, so everyone read like an article. Let's say it's on penguins. The yellow group studied more after reading it for 7 minutes. The red group took a practice test. Okay, so within 5 minutes, the yellow group is going to do a little bit better. If they take the test again after 2 days, the yellow group actually does significantly worse than the red group. The red group forgets less. And then the same happens after 1 week. So according to this, taking a practice test is actually better than studying more. Then we have different levels of processing. So there's effortful and automatic processing, but there's also shallow processing and deep processing. This picture has nothing to do with that except for it shows shallow versus deep. So shallow processing is encoding on a basic level based on the structure or appearance of the words. Deep processing is encoding semantically, which is like the meaning of the words, or making connections. So that's going to lead to the best retention. Here's some sample questions. So a shallow processing example would be, is the word in capital letters? Yes or no? Another one would be, does the word rhyme with train? Yes or no? And then deep, would the word fit in the sentence? So the top two, you're less likely to remember what the word actually is than, this one. Also helpful is the self-reference effect, which means that making information personally meaningful makes it more memorable. And that's it. That was a long one.